On this episode we're going to be looking some more at the River Wrinn, the River Yeo near Rington. I'll be walking along the river from Congresbury and rejoining the Saxon charter of Banwell. I will also be discussing Romans in the landscape and their engineering feats. Back in Congresbury, but I'm doing the Banwell Charter, the Barnabulla, and it is, but I'm still following the Yeo, because the Yeo is getting quite interesting now. I'm heading for the part where the old manor of Banwell touches the manor of Rington, and that is where on both sides, in the Rington Charter and the Banwell Charter, the River Yeo is called the Wrinn. We've lost the ability to say the W at the beginning words, so like wrench and ringing and things like this, you know, wringing out a cloth. We no longer say the W. It's one of many silent letters in our language, which shows not just the oldness of the English language, but the degradation of it. But here we are, and Wrinn is, I never explained on the last video what it meant, and it's an Old English word that's related to the word wry, as in a wry grin. Somebody who has a wry grin is enjoying things going wrong, and I have a wry grin. And that's having a wry grin. So it is something wonky, which is how it got its name. So I'm making my way to where the old boundary of Banwell and the boundary of Rington meet on the River Yeo, the River Wrinn, and we'll talk about some of the anglo-saxon Dark Age boundary marks. Now it's worth remembering that with these things I'll hardly ever show you a village, because the only information I have is on the outskirts, the boundary. They describe the boundaries, they didn't very much describe anything else. So when I do these things, I'm showing you the outside of villages, where villages join, and missing out everything in between. It's concentrating on the circumference of something and not the centre is a very bad psychology. It could be an element of my psychology, in the sense that I think very much of security and conflict and resolution of conflict and the dialectics, two things rubbing together, and very much and much less about centering things and being whole and contented and calm. And it could be a psychological thing. It's also the only information I have about the Dark Ages, the written records. This is pretty much all I have on the village level. But anyway, so I'm still on the marshes, and you can still see along the river edges here flood defences. It was salt. The River Wrinn, the River Yeo, is salty up until the bridge, I'm told. I would like to stick my finger in and have a taste, but there's probably all sorts of phosphates and things, and calcium and everything else in there. So I'm not going to take the risk. Though if I was a good citizen scientist, I would do it. But this is this is not just an Anglo-Saxon landscape. The early English, the Anglo-Saxons. I was having a short discussion with somebody else who was talking about the Welshness of this area, the Romano-British, the sub-Romans, and I can't find I can't find all that many Welsh names in this area. I can in Dorset, Wiltshire, Hampshire, Devon, and so on, especially Cornwall. Somerset less. I suspect the defeat of the British was earlier here than elsewhere. But it still does. It still did retain. We know from there is a hill fort over there called Cadbury Hill Fort, and he corrected me when I said it was meant Cadbury. Cad meant battle. It meant war. He corrected me and said more like battle, and he's probably right. But it shows a rebuilding of the hill forts after the Romans left. They were in a state of emergency, and they had to hit the hills, fortify themselves, and prepare for war. But not just that, to concentrate wealth. We can see from these West Country hill forts a whole load of trade goods from the Mediterranean. We can see the remains of it in the amphora, and the pots have been crushed and left about. But they would have held commodities such as fish sauce, olive oil, wine. So it wasn't, the Dark Ages here weren't as much of a Dark Ages. Certainly the ruling elite had the benefits of civilization, but only through trade. They had something to trade. Probably lead, mend it around here, lead, silver, things like that. They had it to trade with the Mediterranean, the Romans. People call them Byzantines, I'll call them Eastern Romans. But because they called themselves the Romai, even if it was in Greek, they still thought themselves as the Romans. But nonetheless, even though they had the trappings of civilization, they weren't manufacturing anything. These aren't British pots. There is no, we see a collapse in such things as hobnail boots in burials, and that shows us that industry wasn't taking place here. They had a commodity which they sent abroad. They weren't manufacturing anything. So it was still a failed state, even if the elites were still maintaining some sense of Roman culture. So apart from the Romans fortifying Cadbury Hill Fort, it's not the same Cadbury as South Cadbury Hill Fort, which is your classic Arthurian Roman British resistance fort, which after the see, people have looked at the theoretical basis of archaeology pre-Second World War and post-Second World War. Pre-Second World War, it was all about the Anglo-Saxons, our Anglo-Saxon heritage, and the Saxon boat burial. And then we had a war with the Germans, and suddenly we are no longer interested, and it's all about English people being really interested in the Welsh. And that still holds true today. I am a firm believer in Romano-British, that is Welsh enclaves in Western Britain, holding out for a couple of hundred years against the English. And there is a romantic element to that. But so we have to be conscious of why we're thinking certain things and how. So that's the South Cadbury Hill Fort is your classic Arthurian hill fort, and this Cadbury, see, there's more than one Cadbury, is significant. And this Cadbury up here is less so, but it was refortified. It had a church in it. I think it had a church. I'm pretty sure it had a church in it, and an early one. And that is something also that goes along with the Arthurian myth, which I don't believe in. You know, I accept Ambrosius Aurelius was a major war leader during the Saxon invasion, and that's pretty much it as far as I'm concerned. But Christianity goes I'm in two minds, because around about 360 something or other, you had a resurgence in pagan religion in Western Britain. You get a lot of temples being built on hilltops to the pagan gods. But it's quite clear that after the Romans left, it is a Christian culture. This is fighting the heathens from Germany. And so there's some interesting Iron Age, there's an Iron Age statue, a bronze statue of a goddess found next to Cadbury. There's a temple next to Cadbury Hill Fort, and that's very similar to a bronze goddess found up in Orst, which is South Gloucestershire, only a few miles away. So we may be looking at the same goddess. We don't know what her name was. But there it is. But the Roman element, in peacetime, there were villas all over this area. So they must have invested a huge amount in draining this land. And it had to be done more than once, because in the 1800s, during enclosure, remember the Enclosure Acts were to improve the land to greater productivity, both for greater profit for the landlord and greater taxes for the government. So it is, you are going to get, we see a series, at least a series of two drainings of the land, then it's lost, and then another or more sets of engineering drainage takes place. Sorry, so cold, I'm having trouble concentrating. But it is, so there's, you know, there's Roman villa up there, Roman villa up there, but nestled into the River Yeo over there is right next to the river is a Roman villa, and that shows engineering. They could not have lived in a swamp, not in a civilized way. And this villa had a mosaic, so it's described as a small villa, but it had a mosaic, which means they weren't poor. The Charter of Banwell says, up forth be King Rhoda erst unto Wrinn. And what that means, what our academics, and also some people who've given me a really good hand, is some local historians have done their own charter of Banwell. I think they're local historians. Well, it might not be. It looks quite academic paper, but they say they make a couple of translation things that I disagree with, and it's not their fault. It's academics previously have said certain things that are wrong. Now, finally, I've got a bit of support from my Oliver Rackham book. He agrees with me on this. Now, what the academics or the local historians have said, translating that, is up forth by the King's Rood, meaning cross, and then along to the Wrinn. Now, Rhoda, it turns up in many charters and nearly always indicates a long linear feature through which you might ride a horse. And now these academics have been racking their brains going, now what could be a long linear feature you might ride a horse along that sounds like Rhoda? What could it be today? And And there's me as a non-academic going, are you mental? It's a road, right? And I've known this forever, but because academics 100, 200 years ago said absolutely no way it's a road, it can't be, academics can't take the risk to say that today. But Oliver Rackham does, so finally I've got somebody to back me up. It is, Grundy says they're long linear features, it might be rides in woodland. They're roads, right? And Oliver Rackham says it is. I say it is, I'm not an expert, I'm an idiot out in the countryside, you don't have to take my word for it. But they come up over and over and over again. It's like Larnen. What could Larnen be? Could they possibly be linear features at which you might wander along? Could they be lanes? It's English, modern English is an extension, is a mutation of Old English. And we have further evidence today, because what survives on the map today, even today on the modern OS map, is a road called King Road. And it just, you know, it's obvious. And they, what the academics say in this paper is they think there might have been a rood on the King's Road. And, you know, just, you know, further compounding their error. But it's road. There's no two ways about it. I've got my suspicions about another one. Well, no, I definitely know in this chapter, but I'll do it in another video. I'm not staying out all day here. It's fucking freezing. It feels like somebody's slapping me across the face with a string of stinging nettles. It's about 2 degrees centigrade. And so with wind chill factor, it's probably below 0 degrees. So I'll go into that in another video, but there's another, generally, there's another one. You often find a highway, and they're roads that go uphill, very often, nearly always, roads uphill. Now, the translation of here, according to Bosworth Toller, which is a dictionary of Old English language, it's he is hay. Yet we have roads that are going uphill that don't half sound like highway to me. Now, high, as for nearly always, 99% of the time, is hern or her. I think it's a technical mutation. I suspect. Now, I've got no evidence of that at all, apart from the fact that topographically they're nearly always going hill. You don't grow hay on top of a hill. You grow hay down in the river valleys, on your mead, on your meadow. So, I mean, you use highland for pasture, but you wouldn't cut it with a scythe and then drag it down to the village. So yes, so that's my. We've got the road going up to the Wrinn. Now, there's one last thing I want to do. The King's Road. The reason why it's called the King's Road is because Congresbury used to be a royal estate, and that woodland up there is the King's Wood. So that's you know, that's rather nice. But there's one last thing I want to do. I'm going to have a look at the Hillsbrook, which is the Brook of the Hills, and this is where I do agree with those academics who wrote that paper.